I will share screen my slide image.
Yes, please.
Is it visible? Okay, so good morning, Bu Amanda and friends. Today, me and Nurul will be presenting our project of our progress project about the topic that we choose is the low acceptance of COVID-19 vaccine in Indonesia amidst the current pandemic. So, yeah, I think Nurul will begin the first part of the presentation.
Okay, before I start, am I audible, Miss? Okay, thank you. So thank you, Pascal, for opening the presentation. For now, I will explain about the presentation outline for today. First one, we will explain the problem identification for the issue that we raised. The second one, there will be the source of the problem. The third one will be the solution and effectiveness. And the last one will be the individuals who are in most need. Next slide, Carl. Next slide. Okay, so basically the title of our project, we were interested in analyzing the low vaccination rate in Indonesia during this pandemic situation. And so we would like to explain the problem behind such issue. So the COVID-19 virus was first detected in Wuhan, China in December 2019. I believe all of you are already familiar with this situation that we're currently facing. From epidemic, the virus then became pandemic due to high rate of transmission through direct, indirect, and close contact with the infected person. Up until today, we all know that the pandemic is still not over yet. The virus is still out there and spreading all over the world. However, there is still a chance that we can combat this pandemic with a strategy, what's so-called herd immunity, where it means that most of the population should be vaccinated or have been exposed to the virus, which then will lower the possibility for the virus to find a new host to mutate. In order to achieve the goal of herd immunity, the Indonesian government has been putting their best effort in importing huge numbers of vaccines through several agreements. While the supply of vaccines are coming progressively to Indonesia, the number of demand for COVID-19 vaccination is not as much as the government has been expecting. For the sake of data, we actually face a limitation for statistical data since the issue of low acceptance rate for vaccine is still quite recent and the vaccination program itself is still ongoing. And so we utilize the existing data from survey, news articles, and papers. Next slide, please. For further details, we will now break down between the supply and the demand of the vaccination in Indonesia. In terms of supply, Indonesia's Ministry of Health has signed an international agreement with COVAX, Gavi, WHO, and UNICEF to secure the availability for vaccine doses for Indonesia. In total, the government is expected to receive 80 million doses of vaccines by the year of 2021. However, on the other hand, the acceptance rate of vaccine from the demand side still remains low. According to COVID-19 vaccine acceptance survey in Indonesia conducted by the Ministry of Health, MITAG, UNICEF, and WHO, there are 7.6 respondents who refuse to get vaccine, and still 27.6% of respondents who are having vaccination hesitancy, where it means that some of those people are accepting, delaying, or refusing to get vaccine. Next slide, please. The survey also provides several answers from the respondents regarding their personal reasoning on refusing to get vaccine. As you can see on the slide, a respondent said that we don't know the side effects of the vaccine or if it is efficient. Another respondent said that vaccines need 1 year of testing at minimum and 10 years of research completion. I never received immunization since I was an infant, and so I refuse to be vaccinated. I think it is more viable for the elderly. Another respondent also mentioned that if there are side effects, no one will take responsibility for the medical cost incurred. All these reasonings indicate that some people still reluctant to get a vaccine due to several reasonings, including the uncertainty of side effects, vaccine effectiveness, as well as the future medical cost incurred. For better understanding, let's move on to the data we obtained based on the result of the survey. Next slide, please. As you can see on the bar graph, there are 30% of respondents who are still concerned about the safety of the vaccine. There are 22% of respondents that are still uncertain about the vaccine's effectiveness. There are 12% of respondents who are concerned towards the side effects of the vaccines. 13% of respondents are lacking in trust towards the vaccine. 8% of respondents are refused to get vaccinated due to religious belief, and the other 15% of respondents with other specified reasoning. As a result, if most of people are still reluctant to get vaccine, then it will be hard for Indonesia to achieve the herd immunity condition where we were supposed to get back in order to do economic recovery. Next slide. And now we will elaborate further about the source of the problem of low vaccination rate in Indonesia, which will be explained by Pascal.
Okay, thank you. So I will continue about the source of the problem. Well, according to Robster in the BBC website, there are several psychological factors that may cause differences in people responding vaccinations. Well, this could be more to a subjective matter, which affects one's choice to accept or willing to be vaccinated. Well, these factors are called as the 5C, which contains of confidence, complacency, calculation, constraints, and collective responsibility. So the first one is confidence or keyakinan, kepercayaan. Well, this factor refers to the subject's belief of the effectiveness and the safety of the vaccine, as well as the health services who provide and execute the vaccination. As an example, up until June 2020, it has been found that at least 850 sources of information are hoax regarding the COVID-19 virus. The information provokes that the vaccination are made out of haram substances and can lead to severe side effects, which then lead people's rejection to receive the vaccine dose. The second factor is called complacency or kelengahan, which refers to whether the person perceives the certain illness as a serious threat to their health. If there is a perception that if the vaccine only eliminates a small amount of the transmission risk or the disease, vaccination is then considered as a less important measure. For example, a survey, Indonesia Political Indicator Survey, found that 54.9% of the respondents from age 22 to 25 refused to get vaccination. And one particular reason is because the young cohorts feel that they have less complaints rather than the older groups. Therefore, it leads to the assumption where they won't be needing this vaccination because they feel that they have stronger immunity. And the third one is called calculation, perhitungan, where this factor refers to the involvement of the people searching and evaluating the advantage of this or disadvantage and the cost benefits of the vaccination through resources and references. Unfortunately, the process of information calculation is often misled or miscalculated by people due to the dominance of the anti-vaccine groups, which have existed and massively dispersed through Facebook since 2019. A study found that such groups are threatening since they spread provocative information regarding the rejection of COVID-19 vaccine, which can affect people's point of view towards the vaccination program. The fourth factor is constraints or convenience, where this factor includes how easy and accessible the vaccine is for the people, which also includes the affordability, availability of vaccines, access to health services, knowledge, literacy, etc. Where this factors is one of the prominent determinants of the vaccination decisions. And the fifth factor is called the collective responsibility or tanggung jawab bersama, where this factor refers to the willingness of the people to protect themselves and others from getting infected through self-vaccination. The benefits of the vaccination program are feasible when there are enough people who are successfully vaccinated and forming a herd immunity. So next we will see about the solutions proposed and the effectiveness tried by the government, private sector, NGO, and IGO. Okay, so some existing actions. I will explain some examples, and Nurul then will continue. So first one, there's a campaign. Okay, so according to CHIPS Indonesia, Center of Indonesia public policy study, if I'm not mistaken, in 2021, the government has already implemented a vaccination campaign by boosting the vaccination process through there's a VP, a vaccinasi program, and a VGR, or vaccinasi gotong royong. Vaccinasi program is fully implemented by the government, where vaccinasi gotong royong authorizes SMEs to purchase and conduct vaccination to their employees and families. The vaksinasi gotong royong then is expanded based on the Peraturan Menteri Kesehatan nomor 18 tahun 2021 that authorizes that SMEs to conduct vaccination to the citizens around the location to be participated. There are possibilities that this vaccination process will be expanded again to prevent future waves of emergencies. And the vaksinasi gotong royong has made a quite good progress, where on May 18, 2021, at the starting of vaksinasi gotong royong, there were more than 22,000 companies that registered 10 million doses of 10 million vaccine recipients. As for further steps that we can see that have been taken by the government is to promote COVID-19 vaccination by massive socialization and utilizing public influencers and public figures. The second one is there are sanctions. Well, according to a juridical review from January 2021, there are sanctions regarding the vaccination refusal, which are stated in Article 13A, Presidential Regulation number 14, year 2021, where it states that everyone that has been set as a target of COVID-19 vaccine recipients must receive the vaccine, and everyone that has been designated as the target of COVID-19 vaccination recipients but refuses to participate may be subject to administrative sanctions such as postponement or termination of Social Security and assistance or government administrative service, or maybe monetary fines. Another one is in Article 13B in the same Presidential Regulation number 14, year 2021, states that the eligible targets of COVID-19 vaccination that refuses to receive the vaccination, as explained in Article 13A, is subject to criminal sanctions in accordance with the Law number 4, year 1984 about infectious disease outbreaks, as it hinders the implementation of preventing the spread of COVID-19. And the third existing action is the administrative requirements for travel. Well, the government through the Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy, or Kemenparekraf, has set strategies to dampen the COVID-19 spread. One of the key requirements for travel is administrative requirements such as e-hack applications, Peduli Lindungi, and vaccination certificate. The government utilizes Peduli Lindungi app to trace and track citizens regarding their daily activities, which also requires having the vaccine certificate registered in the app. The requirement that everyone has to have a vaccination certificate is no longer only for tourism activities, but also for daily activities, especially for entering public places.
So another two existing actions will be explained by me. So the other action is through the engagement between the military and police. So in order to support the vaccination program held by the government, Indonesia's police officers have contributed 13,500 people to be responsible as vaccinators in helping the health workers. Within the number, 900 individuals have been given proper training, while the rest is still ongoing. Furthermore, police have provided 40,355 personnel of Babin Kamtibnas, which stands for Bayangkara Pembina Keamanan dan Ketertiban Masyarakat, that will be spread to 34 different provinces in Indonesia, which will be responsible as tracer. With a total population of more than 260 million of people, Indonesia is expected to have at least 80,000 personnel of tracer across the country. However, the current numbers of personnel are still far below the target. Regardless of shortage personnel and exact number of vaccination progress after this collaboration, the Minister of Health, Mr. Budi Gunadi Sadikin, admitted that the contribution of police and military forces have really helped the health workers and government in executing the vaccine program. The last existing action is called the contribution of private sectors. And so Grab Indonesia, Good Doctor Technology, Danone Indonesia, and Kalbe are collaborating with Indonesia's Ministry of Health and several local governments in order to support the vaccination program by providing Grab Vaccine Center, which has become the first vaccination facility in Indonesia that provides 3-in-1 services. The 3-in-1 vaccination service implies that the vaccine can be given to the society through car drive-through, motorcycle drive-through, as well as walk-in process. Therefore, the 3-in-1 service has created another level of convenience for the vaccine's participants, since they will have more access to avoid long queues to get the vaccine dose. The Grab vaccination centers initially opened in West Java and Banten to encourage the drivers and citizens in joining the vaccination program. But now, the Grab vaccine centers have extended to open in other provinces such as Bali and Yogyakarta. According to Indonesia's Ministry of Tourism and Creative Economy, Mr. Sandiaga Uno, the opening of Grab vaccine center in Bali will certainly help the recovery of the tourism industry. Meanwhile, in Yogyakarta, the Grab vaccine centers are targeting those people with disabilities and public sector workers. The collaboration between the private sector and government has shown a significant impact towards the number of vaccination participants. As a result, 6,000 of people have been vaccinated through Grab vaccine center in Banten, while 5,000 people have been vaccinated in West Java's Grab vaccine center. Meanwhile, Grab vaccine center in Bali is aiming to provide 5,000 mass vaccine doses to the people, while Grab vaccine center in Yogyakarta is expected to inject 10,000 doses of vaccines. So far, the recent data for vaccine recipients from Grab vaccine center in Bali and Yogyakarta has not yet been recorded since the program is still in the process. Next slide, please. This section will be explained by Pascal.
Okay. We're at the last point. So the last point is what we think that the individuals who are most in need. So the vaccination program is designed for all citizens within a country. And however, some groups of people still have low acceptance towards the vaccination program. The problems underlying this issue could be in accordance with the explanation that we have discussed before. And moreover, it can be highlighted that the dominant reasoning behind the low acceptance of vaccination is due to the limitation of reliable information about vaccination. Therefore, the analysis here and the proposed policy later on will be addressed mainly to all of the citizens, specifically those who have less education and less income level, and those with less information access to the vaccination. I think that will be the end of our slide today. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Nurul and Pascal. The others, if you want to ask question, you can. Data.
Yeah, thank you, Nurul and Pascal, for the presentation. So I actually have two questions. The first one is this an economic issue, or is this something that can be better explained by other fields? And the second one is what kind of data and using which source of data that you guys are going to be using, or you guys are the ones that you guys have in mind that that you guys can use to further for further research on this topic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dad. I think I'll be able to answer both of your questions. I'll start with your second question, if you don't mind, about the data sources. Well, due to this is a very current, very new topic. We haven't found any official source of a data set maybe for this issue. So we're just gathering from surveys, news about the incidence of people rejecting to accept the vaccination, because the vaccination is just is even started at the beginning of this year. So yeah, it would be hard, especially now, to find an official source which contains the appropriate and the structured data set. Therefore, like I said before, we just combining from numerous sources, news from official websites that contain the latest news and update about the vaccination process and activities in Indonesia. And for the first question, other fields that may explain the COVID-19 hesitation acceptance. So yeah, besides the economic field, the economic issue, one may be a religious belief. it could be seriously a real religious belief, or maybe some could hear it from hoax. Maybe it contains a harmful substance that was mentioned before, or maybe it's not in line with some beliefs, probably. And yesterday I also found a reference that there is also a law that can maybe people can use it to counteract or maybe to reject the vaccination. I think I have in my notes yesterday. Oh yeah, so there is actually undang-undang about HAM, especially the Undang-Undang Nomor 36 tahun 2009 tentang kesehatan. Yesterday I read that there are two that people may use it maybe they can use it if they want to reject the vaccine. There is in pasal 5 ayat 3 Undang-Undang Nomor 36 tahun 2009, it states that setiap orang berhak secara mandiri bertanggung jawab menentukan sendiri pelayanan kesehatan yang diperlukan. And pasal 56 ayat 1 Undang-Undang Nomor 36 tahun 2009, it says that setiap orang berhak menerima atau menolak sebagian atau seluruh tindakan pertolongan yang akan diberikan. Therefore, people might use this based on the word of HAM or human rights to reject the vaccination on whatever basis. I think those are some reasons that I can mention regarding other fields that may hinder the vaccination acceptance. Does that answer your question, Dada?
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Okay, Stefan have question. Also, Aryo have question in chat. So please, Stefan, you can state your question, while either Pascal or Nurul can read Aryo's question.
Oh, okay, Miss. Can you hear my voice clearly?
Yes.
Okay. My question for Pascal and Nurul is that from the presentation, we know that there can be a selection bias in which the individuals can select themselves into not accepting the vaccine. So therefore, I wonder is there any other unobserved characteristics or unobserved factors which may very well affect people's decision to not accept the COVID vaccine in this case? Thank you, Nurul and Pascal.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for the question. And I also actually have read the questions from Aryo, and I think it's quite similar. So it's just to sum up, so you guys are asking whether the individuals are not select themselves into not accepting, or there are actually other significant factors which force them to accept the vaccine. So I think I'm just going to answer the question at once. I think Pascal will also might add some other answer, but from what I have researched for that particular question, I believe there are still some other factors that influence people towards whether they want to get a vaccine, aside from the individual's intention. So I think one of the answer is the people's point of view towards the effect after other people are get vaccine. Like for example, there are some cases where in certain region, some people who already have a vaccine, suddenly they are dead. And so, and some people view that situation, they refer that they are dying because of the vaccine. So the vaccine can result into death. And because of that perspective and the way of thinking, people are then reluctant and kind of scared to get the vaccine. Especially for those people who are living in rural areas where they tend to have low education. And so they're only exposed to this information, but they do not provide it by the real information, like the real science or the real answer behind the death of those people. Like, for example, those people are dead because they actually have a certain or particular disease in their body, which actually cannot accept the vaccine. On the other hand, perhaps they have another crucial illness that they don't actually realize, which then at the end contracted with the vaccine itself. And so I think one of the most affected reason why people also reluctant to get vaccine is because by seeing the experience of other people, and it's no longer a rare issue. It is already common that a lot of people found to be dead after receiving vaccines. I hope my answers are clear, or perhaps Pascal would add something else.
Yeah, so thank you for mentioning about people's misperception of others' experience. So I would like to also add, Aryo here mentioned other factors which force them not to accept the vaccine, like historical health. Yeah, here we could see that some people who may have comorbid or penyakit bawaan, who I think they could not be vaccinated, yeah, due to their health background. Well, this is a force majeure, which it's not that they refused the vaccination, but they couldn't be vaccination. Well, as stated in the problem identification in the first part, well, the goal of the government here is to achieve the herd immunity. And if there are a proportion of people who could not be vaccinated due to force majeure, such as the health background, and therefore the way to achieve the goal of this herd immunity is just to make the people who are actually eligible to accept the vaccine, and to eliminate the hesitation or the misperception of previous incidents. So yeah, I think that is a factor of yeah. Thank you, Aryo.
Okay, last question from Helga.
All right. Thank you, Miss, for the opportunity. Also, thank you, Pascal and Nurul, for the presentation. I actually have two questions regarding the topic. The first one, is there anything that we should consider in order to achieve the herd immunity? The second one is there any information about how the current vaccination program affects the mobility in Indonesia? Thank you.
Thank you, Helga, for the question. So I would like to answer your first question. Regarding the action that the government puts for the herd immunity, I think, I believe also the Satgas COVID-19 Indonesia have several times mentioned that we cannot only rely on the vaccination program in order to get out from this pandemic, and in order to get the herd immunity situation. And so we also have to do we still have to follow the health protocols along doing the vaccination. So the vaccination program would not be efficient if those people who have been vaccinated are not applying the health protocols, such as wearing masks, often washing their hands, and keeping their distance from one another. I think that's my response for the first answer. And for the second answer, I think for the second question, sorry, Helga, can you repeat the question?
All right. For the second question, when conducting this research, do you guys found any information about how the current vaccination program affects the mobility in Indonesia? It's either the goods mobility or the services mobility, or like the overall mobility index in Indonesia. Do you guys find any information about it?
Okay, thank you, Helga. So we actually have not yet found a particular index that can explain the mobility, but we can infer to the less restriction for the regulation that injected by the government, which, as you can see, the PPKM level is now get reduced. So the restrictions also getting less, where restaurants are now able to open for an additional 1 hour. And then people are now in some areas that are considered green areas are now people are allowed to do dine-in for like not only 20 minutes, but more than 20 minutes. So I think that certain types of restriction can reveal that vaccination program, the progress so far, can actually help to increase the people's mobility, as including the opening of business, services, and those stuff. Or maybe Pascal would like to add.
About the mobility, we haven't found some information regarding the mobility. However, well, the current program did boost the economic activities to start again, either economic activities, tourism, and etc. Well, but what has to be careful here is again people's perception, because some people also think that because they're vaccinated, then they're fully immune. It's like that. It's not that we're impossible to receive the virus, but some people may have a misperception, or they take it for granted of this vaccination. Therefore, what needs to also be paid attention is not just the people's willingness to accept the vaccine, but on how do they maintain the health protocol. I think that would be my additional explanation.
Are we answering your question, Helga?
Yes, Ferry. Thank you for the explanation.
Maybe Stefan and Juan would like to mention their questions.
Wait a minute, sorry, I have to cut because we have limited time. Okay. I'm sorry to Juan and Stefan. Helga's was last question. You can ask question for the next presenter, yeah. Sorry, Nurul. It was very interesting, yeah, your topic and your presentation. And my feedback for you, I think it would be great if you can identify the treatment or the policy that the government have, but identify what works and what doesn't work. And then give your own idea of what do you think is going to work better. And also update your data because at the end of the semester, you will present again, update your data and the acceptance of the vaccine, whether it's going up or it's going down, and then determines what make the vaccine going up or going down. Okay, so that's it from me. Thank you for Nurul and Pascal. Let's move on to the next presenter. Yeah, you're very welcome. The next presenter is Vincenza. The Zoom is yours.
Okay, Miss, let me share my screen. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, so good morning, Bu Amanda and friends. My name is Vincenza Vitalonga, and today I'm going to present my progress on my final project for this workshop on development economics class. The topic I chose for the project will be about child marriage in developing countries, especially in Indonesia. First of all, I'm going to say my apologies because I can't turn on my video because last night there was a heavy rain in my house, and then there was a lightning, a very big lightning, and it struck my Wi-Fi cable, I guess. So the Wi-Fi is now kind of not good here. So my apologies. Wait. So here are the contents that I will be presenting today. First, I am going to discuss about the introduction and background of the topic child marriage in Indonesia, and then the various causes of child marriage in Indonesia, and lastly, the solutions that have been proposed by the government of Indonesia regarding the problem of child marriage. Now, let us move on to the introduction part. According to Pasal 1 Undang-Undang tahun 1974 concerning marriage, marriage is an inner and outer bond between a man and a woman as husband and wife with the aim of forming a happy and eternal family based on the one God had. In addition, one of the principles of marriage specified in the marriage law is that the prospective husband and wife must have matured in mind and body to be able to carry out marriage in order to realize the purpose of marriage properly without ending in divorce. This is what later became the reason for the opposition to child marriage, considering that children at a very early age are certainly not yet mature physically and mentally to be able to run a household. According to Leni Rosalin from the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection, child marriage has many negative impacts on children, especially for their education, health, and economy, which can lead to the emergence of new poverty or structural poverty, not to mention other impacts such as violence in the household, human trafficking, as well as the wrong upbringing of children so that children's rights can be taken away. In addition, child marriage can also affect the children's mental health, starting from unstable emotions, unable to take care of themselves, having to take on the role of parents, financial problems in a family, and much more. These pressures will cause stress, depression, and even end up committing suicide. Now take a look at the figure on the slide. The figure above shows the proportion of women and men that are married before the age of 19 in Indonesia. There is significant variation across provinces, ranging from around 11% of women in Yogyakarta to over 40% in Sulawesi Tenggara. As we can see, the prevalence of child marriage is significantly higher for women than for men across all provinces. Many provinces have more of women reporting they were married before age 19. This includes most of Java, Sulawesi Tenggara, South Kalimantan, East Kalimantan, Papua, West Papua, Lampung, and South Sumatra. Collectively, these figures imply that over 38 million women and men who are alive in Indonesia today were married before they reached the age of 19 years old. Now I am going to discuss about various causes of child marriage. The first is the social factor. Social factors become the most prominent as a driver of child marriage cases due to several influences such as environmental influences, risky dating behavior, parental pressure, and pressure from family or the surrounding community. The second factor is the economic factor. Economic factors can encourage parents or families to marry off their children at an early age. Some parents are even obsessed with improving the household economy by matching their children when they are still under 18 years old in the hope of reducing the burden of family economic expenses. The next factor is the pattern of family input. For example, children with parents who have a mindset and parenting that are too rigid and have excessive worries about children's behavior. This parental mindset then tends to encourage children to practice child marriage in order to avoid the potential negative impact of their child's behavior. The last factor to be discussed is education. Education affects knowledge, information, education, and communication regarding the impact of child marriage from both the parents and children's side. Parents with limited education tend to have low knowledge of the impact of child marriage. Of course, this is often found in developing countries where the majority of the people are still underdeveloped with educational problems. Several attempts have been made by the government in Indonesia to prevent child marriage within the country. An example is the effort made by the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection, namely in the form of a social campaign to educate the public about the negative impact of child marriage. In addition, in November 2018, the Ministry of Women's Empowerment and Child Protection, together with the United Nations Population Fund, held a workshop, Formula of the Strategy for the Prevention of Child Marriage in the Regions, which presented best practices from several regions related to child marriage efforts. This workshop is held as an effort so that later other regions in Indonesia can adopt efforts to prevent child marriage. In addition, as an effort to reduce the number of child marriages, the Indonesian government has revised the law related to marriage by increasing the minimum age for marriage for women from 16 years to 19 years per year 2019. Thus, the minimum age for marriage for women and men is now the same. By increasing the minimum age of marriage for women, it is hoped that the public will be more aware of the issue of child marriage, and in the end, it is hoped that the number of child marriages will decrease. However, it turns out that the efforts that have been made by the Indonesian government to reduce the number of child marriages in Indonesia are not sustainable. As reported in almost all mass media, cases of child marriage in Indonesia increased by 300% during the pandemic. In its annual report, the National Commission for Women, or Komnas, found 23,126 cases of child marriage in 2019. The number of the same cases rose to 64,211 cases during 2020. This shows that the efforts made by the Indonesian government and other organizations to reduce child marriage rates are still not successful. For example, during this pandemic, it turns out that learning activities at home have resulted in teenagers having the freedom to socialize in the surrounding environment, including dating. Families are afraid that if the children date across the line, they choose to get married immediately. In a weak family, parental supervision of children has an impact on the occurrence of promiscuity, which results in pregnancy out of marriage. Pregnancy out of marriage is what forced parents to apply for a marriage dispensation to the religious court. Talking about the target population who really need a solution to the problem of child marriage occurs almost evenly in Indonesia, both in rural areas and urban areas. For rural areas, I think the government needs to educate more about the regulation on the minimum age of marriage, considering that many people who live in areas are still lagging behind and do not know about the regulation. Thus, people who live in rural areas can know about these regulations and are more aware of the consequences they will get if they violate these regulations. As for people in urban areas, I think one thing that needs to be strengthened is the socialization of healthy dating styles and sex education, considering that in urban areas, not a few teenagers have sex outside of marriage, and this is one of the reasons for the high number of marriages. Thus, it may reduce the number of child marriages in urban areas. I think that is all regarding my project's progress. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you, Vincenza. Anyone has any question for Vincenza? Please state your question. Yeah, Juan.
Yes, thank you for Vincenza. Actually, I have one question that another big issue in Indonesia is the teen pregnancy, which I assume is one of the factors of the high number of child marriage in Indonesia. Then what do you think should the government do to end the teen pregnancy? Thank you. This is my one and only question.
Okay, thank you, Juan, for the question. Yes, it is true that teen pregnancy is one of the causes of the high number of child marriages in Indonesia. In my opinion, I think the only way to reduce the number of teen pregnancies in Indonesia is to introduce more deeply to teenagers in Indonesia about sex education, considering that it is still taboo to discuss even today. Most people think that if teenagers are introduced to sex education, it will encourage them to do more than to avoid. In my personal opinion, sex education is really needed for teenagers so that they know what negative things can happen if they do it. Maybe if it is not possible, if sex education is directly introduced to teenagers, it can be started from the parents so that later parents can explain directly to their children. I think that is my answer. Juan, is that answering your question?
Yes, but if it's possible, can I add one more question?
Yes, Juan, please.
Okay. So the other question is, you said that the case of child marriage is an important matter to be considered and prevented. And my question is, how do you think that ordinary people like us can help in preventing the child marriage instead of before you explaining the teen marriage?
Okay, thank you for the question. So your question is, how do you think people like us, I mean the ordinary people like us, can help in preventing child marriage? Is that true, Juan?
Yes, that's my question.
Okay. In my opinion, I think one thing that we can do to help prevent the child marriage as a teenager is to stay away from things that can lead to child marriage, such as sex outside of marriage. Another thing we need to pay attention to is the people around us who may still lack of regulation problems from the government itself. For example, like we have cousins who still live in the village who may not be up to date on the regulations set by the government regarding child marriage. Maybe we can start from there. Or maybe if you want to participate more, there must be many NGOs that hold some kind of socialization about child marriage. Maybe we can participate in that too.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Vincenzo.
Thank you, Juan.
Okay, other question?
Ma'am, can I try to ask an
Yes.
opinion-based question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I think to Vinta, it's just a simple question. Do you think in our current society, with the current younger generation, do you think that the modern sex education, such as those that is applied in America, in France, or in most part of Europe, can eventually be applied in Indonesia, whereby we know that the cultural, the religious aspects are pretty intense in our community? So what do you think?
Thank you, Stefan, for the question. Well, I think sex education is very needed in Indonesia, especially because Indonesia is still a lack of information about sex education, especially for the teenagers. And I think it is possible if sex education is included in the, I don't know what to call it in English, mata pelajaran in Indonesia.
In curriculum.
Yeah, curriculum, I mean. Yeah, I think that would be nice because many teenagers in Indonesia are still lagging behind about the sex education. And that is not good because many people will, I don't know, like, I think teenagers in Indonesia will become encouraged to do more of sex than to avoid if there is no sex education applied to them. So I think it would be great if it is applied to teenagers in Indonesia. Stefan.
Okay, thank you, Tiza.
Okay, okay, Zaki, you have question?
Yes, can you hear me? Is my voice clear? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so Finsa, you mentioned previously that the education should be applied in the teenagers, but what are actually the in your opinion, what period of age specifically in teenagers that the sex education will be needed and gives the most like significant changes on this child marriage? That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Zaki, for the question. I think for the age where we can start introducing sex education to teenagers in Indonesia, I think in junior high school, because in junior high school, teenagers are start liking each other, dating each other, and from that, if they are not introduced well about the sex education, I think it will be a risky thing because they are now eligible of doing things that they are curious about regarding sex. Yeah, I think junior high school is the perfect timing.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we already have 3 questions, yeah, if I'm not mistaken. Is there anyone who want to ask more question? If no, I will give Vincenza my feedback. So your topic is interesting, yeah, child marriage in Indonesia. My feedback to you, actually pretty similar with my feedback to Nurul and Pascal. You can identify the policy that has been done in Indonesia and identify what works and what do not work. And then in this, your project, only say child marriage in Indonesia. I think it will be better if you define, like, for example, what outcome do you want to identify in here? Like, for example, the impact of child marriage in the wealth, or maybe the income, or maybe in the education or health issue, or things like that. I think it will be more comprehensive, and you will have a lot more points to dig. And then the good news is you can find a lot of literature that talk about such things. Okay, Vincenza? Okay, thank
you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. We will move on to the next presenter. After Vincenza, it's Amira, please.
Okay, Miss, I will share my screen.
Yep, please do.
Okay, so can anyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So good morning, Ms. Amanda and friends. Today I will present my project with the topic of return of education on employment in Indonesia. So here is the outline of today's presentation. First, I will explain about the problem and then the source of the problem, solution from government and other organizations, follow up from the stakeholders, and last is the targeted solution beneficiaries. So back in 1997, the United States was facing a decline in return on education. This was related to the expansion of the education sector in that country. This incident also occurred in Indonesia. According to the research by Purnastuti, Indonesia faced a decline in the return of education in 1993 until until 2008. This is also due to the large expansion in the education sector. And on February 2019, BPS, Badan Pusat Statistik, has stated that more academic or vocational and university graduates are out of work. This causes the education capital provided has not been able to provide earnings for individuals and the state. So here are two different graphs. The left one shows the average wages in Indonesia, and the right one shows working population based on educational level. This data is obtained from Badan Pusat Statistik 2021. This graph shows us that elementary school graduates dominate the working population. Their jobs are dominated as self-employed, unpaid laborer, and paid laborer. Meanwhile, worker or employees are dominated by senior high school graduates, followed by university graduates. As I mentioned, elementary school graduates dominate the working population. This happen might be due to an intergenerational poverty, or those individuals are not aware about the importance of education. Moving on to the source of problem. Based on the graph, the number of main jobs of university graduates as unpaid laborers has an increasing trend, while the number of university graduates who are paid laborers tend to decrease. This makes the capital used to pursue higher education returns less than it should. The large number of university graduates who have not found permanent jobs can be caused by, first, according to Bairagya, there might be a mismatch in demand or skills, or the low absorption of labor market in developing countries. Second, wage differential are the cost of university graduates still not getting permanent job. As research from Widyanti 2018, that there is a difference in wage payments in the same education makes the return on education vary. So here are several solutions offered by the government and other organizations. So efforts that have been made by the government and other private institutions of social empowerment. Other than that, the government has conducted a job analysis. The government can increase research on the needs of companies and employees so as to increase return on education. Indonesia has also conducted an education study with the OECD regarding work programs. This collaboration generates funds to fund education. The third solution is by trying to be innovative through imitating other countries. In this case, Indonesia have a BLK program that is more or less is the same as the program in Malaysia about labor training, in which the program is focusing and giving training for the unskilled laborers that are trained to have a specific skill to be allocated in a specific working industries. So even though Indonesia have BLK, however, the effectiveness is questionable, since by looking from the youth unemployment rate in Indonesia, it exceeds the available quota of BLK. And last, NGOs help to formulate policies. In this case, Minister of Manpower Indonesia collaborate with ILO to tackle the mismatched skill in Indonesia by formulating policies that are established to tackle the problem, which objective to increase the labor demand and the level of education of the people. So moving on to follow-up solutions by stakeholders. Private sectors began to open up employment opportunities with wider educational specifications. The private sector also began to expand the company in order to absorb labor. The private sector and the government also began to provide funding for MSMEs or startups that have the potential to grow bigger. And several NGOs also help improve the skills of the workforce by providing training or job and job recruitments for underskilled labor, such as Circle Indonesia and Qualita Pendidikan Indonesia. Here are the targeted solution beneficiaries. There are three. First is government, as the one that provides education costs. They can try to establish or create a program that offers incentive for students who are facing economic constraints so that they keep attending school. And then moreover, government should improve the BLK program, increasing the effectiveness of Kartu Prakerja and give out social protection fund for poor households so that it will reduce their economic constraint. As a consequence, their expenditure for education can increase. And then companies as employers, they can increase job opportunities, but at the same time, they need to pay attention to the welfare of employees and provide information about the skills they need to educational institutions. They can also open job opportunities and offer job training for individuals who are underskilled. Unless individual as educated worker. As an educated worker, an individual must be proactive in looking for job opportunities. So here are the reference, and I think that's all for me today. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Amira. If anyone has question for Amira, please state your question. Helga?
All right. Thank you, Mila, for the presentation. I actually have one question. You previously mentioned about the effort of the government to give incentive for the students so they can keep on coming to school. Would you like to give us some example of what kind of program that could incentivize the students to keep going to school? Thank you.
I think there's actually a paper that I read about giving out incentive for students in South Africa. So the program is by dividing students into three categories, which are they are competing in as individual, and then as partners, and then as a group. So but if they earn a high score among their classmates, maybe then they will get an incentive for it. I think the program is more or less like that.
Okay, thank you, Mila.
Okay, Data, you have question?
Yes, thank you, Mila, for the presentation. So I have two quick questions. The first one is, I think there was some descriptive statistics that you include in your presentation, but from what source did you use for your data? Because I'm not sure if there was any source included, so I might be mistaken, so correct me if I'm wrong. And the second question is, what's the target population for your research? What's the target population that you want to focus on? Is it the ones with low income, or the ones or people in urban, in rural areas, or yeah? So those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Data, for your question. So I will answer the first question. I took the data from Badan Pusat Statistik, but I forgot to put in the slide. And then for the question, the second question, I think the targeted population is for the unskilled labor, yeah, which they have a low income.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Mila.
Okay, thank you.
Juan, you have question?
Yes, I have one question. formula that what kind of social empowerment that government can give to those unskilled workers that you have mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you, Chen, for your question. I think by giving training for the unskilled labor, it can be categorized as social empowerment as well. And then by giving training, so it can increase the education quality. I think that's my answer. Does it answer your question?
Yes, thank you, Mila, for the answer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then I will give feedback to Amira. Your topic is actually quite popular. So return on education in the employment, yeah. You will find a lot of literature that talk about it, and I think you will have a lot of potential doing quantitative approach for this topic. You can check the micro data, like for example from IFLS or Susenas. That way you can actually measure the impact of the government policy such as training or other government assistance that actually aiming to help return on education. You can also identify the outcome of the return on education itself, like for example, the future employment or maybe the future income and things like that. Okay, so that's my feedback for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Amanda, for your input.
Okay, so the last one for Stefan and Zaki, you can begin and the Zoom room is yours.
Okay, wait, miss, let me open the slide first.
Okay, so can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so then we will proceed. So good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ms. Amanda and my fellow colleague classmates. So today I am Stefan Budiman and my colleague is Zaki Gumilang. We are going to explain the impact of government cash transfer program on the cigarette consumption that affect Indonesian households' expenditures. So next slide, please, Zaki. For the problem identification, the cash transfer program discussed in this needs assessment report refers to the Indonesian government Unconditional Cash Transfers Program, or known as the Bantuan Langsung Tunai, or BLT in Bahasa Indonesia. So in 2005, the Indonesian government initiated the BLT program as one of few commodities, especially in the global prices that eventually affect the local prices in Indonesia. And that eventually led to a decrease in purchasing power of the Indonesian society, especially to those of poor households, according to Abidin in 2012. And then the story goes before the year of the BLT implementation, whereby since 2003, Indonesia had become a net importer of oil to meet the domestic demand, and thus the increase of global oil prices could be unprofitable for Indonesia, such that the domestic oil prices also increased in accordance with the global prices, which drove up the production costs in the Indonesian economy and cause the fuel subsidies budget to go up. And in response, the Indonesian government will then reduce its amount of the fuel subsidies, and that will affect the household's purchasing power along with the other factors as well. So next slide, please. So the unconditional cash transfers program specifically targets the near poor and poor households across all regions in Indonesia, whereby its main objective is to sustain and or improve the well-being of Indonesian society to alleviate the economic effects of the rising fuel prices, in which generally press the production costs from the supply side perspective within the Indonesian economy. And then the BLT program was believed to enable government and the local authorities alike to alleviate poverty and thus reduce the possibility of more intergenerational poverty that could really hurt households for both in the short and the long run, according to Rawlings and Rubio in 2005. So therefore, it was critical for the government to conduct its responsibility to the Indonesian society through the implementation of BLT program in order to help those in need to meet their substantial and basic needs. Next slide, please. And in this needs assessment report, the authors aim to evaluate how the unconditional cash transfer program for the poor and the non-poor households actually impact their cigarette consumption, and that we assume the cigarette consumption takes a proportion of their household expenditures. So we aspire to question whether the BLT program increase or actually decrease in the proportion of households expenditures that are used for cigarette consumption, and that would also infer a change in the allocation of household expenditures for other necessities, such as the medication costs, education investments, proper clothing, housing bills, consumption, and etc. Next slide, please. So the problem identification of this report consists of both qualitative and quantitative methods. And for the qualitative analysis, the authors aim to identify the impacts of the BLT program on household cigarette consumption behavior by acknowledging the fact that cigarette consumption is generally viewed to have a negative impact on the individual's health condition. And by receiving an unconditional cash transfers that could help households with their ability to purchase these necessities, the government would expect that the households are better off in a sense that they can purchase more medication when needed, and then they can consume more educational investments for their children. They can maintain substantial and if not improve the consumption for their families instead of using the cash transfers to consume more cigarettes. Next slide, please. And for the quantitative analysis, the authors try to question whether by receiving the transfer assistance, households could adjust their cigarette consumption that would affect the household expenditures for other needs of consumption. And this report aims to analyze the significant impact that BLT can have on the household's cigarette consumption as one of the allocation of household expenditures. So next slide, please. The source of the problem. So from the general perspective, we can argue that the households are able to utilize their resources on both investment and consumption in the allocation process of their economic income, according to Inayati in 2017. And then following our qualitative approach, the authors refers the consumption of theory to the permanent income hypothesis and the random walk hypothesis explained by Romer in 2021. But then in this assessment report, we focus more on the permanent income hypothesis, whereby it illustrates an individual's consumption that is affected by his or her received income, whereby the income is assumed to be certain. Hence, the consumption itself is certainty. category in accordance with the work of INAYATI in 2017. So the source of this problem arises from the BLT program that provides a transitory income for the beneficiary households, which indeed helps to improve their total income, such that the consumption for cigarettes could also increase and affect other primary household expenditures that are essential for them in escaping poverty and or improve their well-being, especially for the children of the family. Next. Okay, so according to the Romer's work in 2012 on the theory of permanent income hypothesis, the budget constraint is the equation number 1. The assumption he or she has a lifetime utility of his permanent income. And then as the individual maximizes his or her utility, the Lagrangian function happens to be the equation number 2, in which in the equation number 2, we do the first order condition for the Lagrangian function to obtain this second equation. And then before moving to the final equation 3, we assume that the marginal utility of consumption is constant for each period, meaning that the consumption for each period, C1, C2, C3, C4, and C so forth, is constant for all periods. So that we can substitute the Lagrangian function to the budget constraint. So the equation 2, we substitute it to the equation 1 to obtain the final equation 3. So this equation 3 is the final permanent income hypothesis based on the works of Romer. So this explanation shows us that the consumption of an individual in each period is not only subjected by his or her income in that given period, but instead also subjected by all their income during his or her lifetime. As we know that the consumption is determined by permanent income hypothesis, permanent income, according to Friedman in 1967. So the Romer's explanation of the permanent income hypothesis is acknowledging the fact that the general economic framework of sharing individual income into consumption and saving is related to the topic of cigarette consumption with respect to the assistance of BLT program. So INAYATI in 2007 also found that by influencing the importance of saving for the household, the BLT program has actually decreased the cigarette consumption of the households, as the savings of an individual would also increase if their permanent income rises relative to the average income. So it is assumed that the savings equal to investment, so the I equals to F, the general concept that we understand, in a sense that by allocating more of their income to savings rather than to cigarette consumption, households can better allocate their income for investment, such as their children's education, health standards, and etc. So due to the source of the problem explained beforehand, the Indonesian government strives to reduce the cigarette consumption to sustain the public health standard for the poor households by targeting the BLT program for the households that meet the Central Statistic Agency recipients requirements based on the BPS 14 indicators for the BLT program beneficiaries. Next slide, please. So we'll be a little bit quicker due to the time. So for the methodology, the report uses the work is based on the work of INAYATI from 2017, which identifies the impact of the BLT program on cigarette consumption. However, the authors in this report added further qualitative analysis of the aforementioned cigarette consumption, which affects the poor and near poor households' allocation of their expenditures. So the data used is the IFLS 3 and the IFLS 4 from the year 2000 and the year 2007. I'm sorry, this is typo, not 200. And then we aim to observe the impact of the BLT program before and after the implementation of the BLT program. The outcome of interest of our observation is the change in cigarette expenditures, as we can infer that any change of the cigarette consumption would reflect the changes in household expenditures for other consumption as well. So the weakness of this model is that in this observation, we cannot precisely account for the counterfactual, since all households within the BLT program have already received the cash transfers. Thus, the treatment was already implemented. Consequently, the randomized control trials, or the RCT, couldn't be implemented in our model. Therefore, the fixed effects method was used to estimate the model. So in accordance with the fixed effects method at the household level, according to Woodbridge in 2003, so this is the given economic specification, whereby IGT is the outcome variable describing the household I in village G and at year T, cigarettes consumption, and the dummy variable is the BLT, indicating it takes the value of equals to 1 if the household I in village J at year T received the BLT program, and 0 if otherwise. And then the Xij is the control variable, which contains household characteristics, and then the mu is the fixed effect at the village level, and the V, or the error term, is for the households in village J at the year T. The unobserved characteristics that we cannot observe in this model. So by adding the fixed effect into our model, the error term VIG is then assumed to be uncorrelated with the variable BLT. So the control variables include characteristics of the sex of the households, the sex of the household's head, and then the years of schooling that the household had received, and the size of the household. And then to prevent any potential bias that may appear, or to prevent any further bias that may appear due to the non-random placement, because all beneficiaries were essentially selected after meeting the requirements of the BLT program, any misallocation or any maldistribution of the program is the unobserved factor that we cannot observe. So thus, the fixed effect mu J was added by the dummy variable for each village. So therefore, beforehand, the dummy variable was for the household level, but then the extended model transformed the dummy variable into the village level to account for the misallocation or the maldistribution, aka the corruption that may happen in the household level, by the fact that sometimes the assistance is not directly given, or there can be any unobserved factors that we cannot account for in the household level. So therefore, the fixed effects estimation at village level prevents the unobserved and the time invariant characteristics to cause a bias in the model's estimated coefficient of the covariance, according to Woodbridge 2003. So next slide, please. The results and the findings. So based on the calculations of the model above, given the table, so we added the table in the report main, but not in the SPPT. So the fixed effect using the aforementioned regression model, the fixed effect at the village level showed that the BLT program negatively and significantly affected the household's consumption of cigarettes. These results indicate that the cash transfers weren't used for consumption, but possibly used for an investment of the household, as followed with the permanent income hypothesis that we have discussed before. Since the payments of BLT is conducted not on a monthly basis, but once in 3 months, this would suffice the households to use such transitory income for savings and investment instead of daily consumption for a cigarette, for example. And other results include that the existence of a smoker in a household has a positive significant effect on the cigarette consumption in the household. And then the age of the household head also positively influences the cigarette consumption in the household. And then the households with more males are associated with having a higher cigarette consumption, but then household with more children is associated with a lower cigarette consumption. And the households in rural areas have a lower cigarette consumption compared to households in more urban areas. The authors of this report infer from the results that cigarette consumption could be reduced through the implementation of the BLT program with the analysis of its effects method at the village level. So it is important to note for us to note that the BLT program only provided small amounts of money for the households. Hence, if the BLT was used for investment purposes, the generated return would still be too low to raise their consumption. Therefore, the author strongly suggests that the household can allocate these cash transfers into a productive asset that will ease their economic activity to earn more income, but also require more economic costs to operate, such that, for example, if we have this BLT money and we purchase it to buy a machine, that machine can produce some goods that we can produce and we can sell, but then that machine is also in need of the cost of electricity, the cost of any maintenance, and etc., such that we allocate the rest of our income to the maintaining the machine and to paying the electricity bills instead of consuming more cigarettes. And that we can conclude that by applying the BLT program on the Indonesian society would give a positive impact in the form of the desired decrease of cigarette consumption for the recipient households, such that they would be able to allocate more of their income into productive investments that pay off in the long run. Next slide will be explained by my colleague Zaki.
Okay, thank you, Stefan. So the next we'll be discussing about the existing solutions that are already happening right now. So the proof of the existing solution does not specifically address for the smoking cessation, only that the one that shows the committing smoking cessation is the one that had been conducted in the Philippines by the JPAL, is called CARES, on committed action to reduce and end smoking. And the second one, there is another existing solution, but this is not directly addressing the smoking cessation, is the conditional and unconditional cash transfer, which already discussed by Stefan previously, is the BLT. And we have another is PKH, Bansos, KIS, Kartu Indonesia Sehat, Kartu Indonesia Pintar, and Kartu Keluarga Sehat. And another can be the government policy, is the increasing cigarette tax, which has already been a common research paper journal. So next, for the solution progress and condition on the CARES by the Abdul Latif Jamil or Poverty Action Lab, is that they conducted a program, an experimental program for people to actually choose whether they willing to reduce their cigarettes consumption, or they will allocate their money to save. Then after each end of month, they will be checked if they are consuming cigarettes or not. And then the results shown that only around 50% people are willing to save their money until the end of the 12th month. And then another finding shows that after people reach the end of their targeted saving, then they will stop allocating their money to save. Instead, they will buy cigarettes. So that also explains why only 50% of the people are willing to save their money until the end of the 12th month of the experimental program carried by the JPAL in Philippines. Here are the percentage. And then, however, due to contract agreement, the financial level by participant cannot be revealed. Therefore, the limitation of this program is that we cannot yet unpack how much the treatment effect of this program on smoking cessation. Another one, as we all know, is already the government safety net, which is the conditional and unconditional cash transfer. They do not address specifically, but they do have the side effects, which is people are considering this conditional and unconditional cash transfer as the transitory program. Therefore, they will consider to allocate their money instead of allocating to the cigarettes consumption. They will tend to save their money and invest on the future expenses, which already been discussed by Stefan in the previous slide. Here are the conditional cash transfer has been already conducted since the Suharto era, before the 2000. And through the several research, which is the paper by Inayati, the impact of BLT is also proven to be affecting the household behavior in money allocation, as I mentioned before. However, the limitation of this government intervention is that the population still projecting several bias, starting from the selection bias, which those who supposed to be doesn't receive the treatment have different characteristics, and also the data of those who receive between different intervention has overlapped, therefore causing possible bias. So example that those who supposed to be only receiving PKH and BLT, they also receive Bansos and KIS. Therefore, they project an overestimate of the smoking consumption. And then the last one is the government policy on cigarette tax. And there's also many paper already showing that the increase of cigarette tax is evident on the lower and middle class, which shows that for the lower, cigarettes become inelastic goods. However, for middle to upper class cigarettes, the changes for upper class cigarette changes in consumption is statistically small. So it's not very evident on the middle to upper class. Instead, it was only exist in the lower class. So the target of our research was actually on assessing the impact of cigarette consumption on smoker population in Indonesia within household and behavior observation on the money allocation. Since according to WHO, 65% in the death of Indonesia, it's caused by the cardiovascular disease, as you can see here. And each year there are 558,736,000 of death due to the smoking. And 26% was caused by the CBD itself. So as you can see on the table is that mostly the population comes from youth. The youth only contribute 36%, while above 15 plus year period, they contribute 67% to the smoker population. As you can see here, and those people are coming to the lower class. Therefore, those people are subjected to the intervention as previously mentioned, the PKH, Bansos, Raskin, KIP, KKS, and KIS. So I think that's all. Our target population would be those with the ranging age from 13 and above. That's all from me and my colleague, Stefan Harris. If there has any question, we would like to discuss. Thank you.
Yeah, please ask question. Okay, Nurul.
Okay, thank you, Paul and Zaki, for the presentation. I actually have one question in mind. So, as we all know that BLT is actually not originally intended for causes of cigarettes consumption, then what is the reasoning behind your decision to utilize BLT program within your framework? Thank you.
Okay, I think I will try to answer it first, then Jackie will add. So, yes, I think the deficiency or the laxness of our report is based on the fact that BLT program was not originally intended for the causes of any cigarette consumption, but then we, on the process of observation and gathering the papers and the literature study, we have found that many studies outside of Indonesia also relate the fact that additional programs or the cash transfer programs of the government can sometimes be misallocated by their population to be used for the consumption that is not essentially beneficial for their household. So therefore, we realize that there is a necessity to understand that it's important for us to actually expect and to actually strive for reducing the cigarette consumption, given the treatment of a BLT program in a given population. And then we found the work of Inayati in 2017, whereby the results are actually quite convincing in the sense that after the implementation of the BLT program on the population, and with the emphasizing and the social, I don't know, it wasn't explained whether it was a social trainings or the social speaking or the public speaking in front of the people when they are rejecting the BLT program. But then it is said that the importance of savings were delivered to the population so that the people, especially the rural households, actually gain more information about the importance of saving, and thus they actually spend more of the BLT funds for investment and for saving instead of the cigarette consumption. So I think there is the reasoning behind our work relating the BLT program to the cigarette consumption.
Okay, thank you.
I think Aryo have question in the chat box.
Okay. I've just read the question, and the question is it possible for the government to monitor the expenditure of each household regarding the use of funds? Or is there another way from the government to avoid the misuse of cash transfer funds outside of socialization through mass media? So far, I don't know if Stefan Aris has already a different answer with me, but from my answer, currently there is not yet a possible way for a government to monitor their expenditure, except the government intentionally give the form of the conditional cash transfer in a certain, such as the Bansos and the Raskin. This is a subsidy for direct, so they won't misallocate the money. And also using such as the program of the CARES, the JPAL conducted in Philippines, there is such a way that the government can make a socialization through the head of the district level, such as the RT or RW, to make a socialization on the allocation of the money that has been transferred. I think that's one of the way the government can assure that the allocation of money is well spent according to the necessities of the people. Perhaps Paul want to add or have different answer?
Yes, I think I would add to Jackie's argument, and perhaps I must agree, Miss, that to this point, based on our observation, there is no exact way that is perfect for the government to measure the allocation of the BLT funds that is actually spent on cigarette consumption. But then we can figure out a way to actually track down the cigarette consumption of the households that actually receive the BLT program through the IVLS data, in which it is categorized the people receiving the BLT program, and we can use that sample which to determine the cigarette consumption of the sample. Because explained earlier in the problem identification, this paper does not utilize on the randomized control trials because essentially all the samples receiving the BLT program is already receiving the treatment, and hence there is no random sampling. So it's just I don't know what it's called, Miss. So it's just the treatment is already given to the population. So that's, I think, another alternative that the government can use to track down the cigarette consumption of those receiving the BLT program is through the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan program, in which if we want to employ into the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan, the data actually requires us to feel whether we are a smoker or not, and whether we are a receiver of government programs or not. And then through those categorization, if there is an increase in the smoking related diseases, and then we can assume that the government can somehow expect that the cigarette consumption has been increasing in that given period because the smoking related disease has been increasing for the samples that receive the BLT program in the BPJS Ketenagakerjaan. So I think that is our answer. Aryo, does it answer your question? Okay, thank you, Aryo and Nurul.
Okay, anybody else have question? Helga?
I actually have one quick question. Considering the small amount of BLT, which I just found out that it's only around 300,000 rupiah per month for each family, do you think it would theoretically would have a transformative effect of the decision of cigarette expenditure of each household? Thank you.
Okay, I think I will try to answer it first. Yes, Helga, it is explained in the earlier slides in the problem identification that the amount of the BLT given to the households was only around 100,000 rupiah per month. And that area of the payment is also only delivered once in 3 months. So we can conclude that once the households receive the program, and given all the costs that we actually inquire in our life time here in Indonesia after the year 2005, for 3 months is not a big amount of money to be used for daily consumption, which is found by the INAYATI in 2017, whereby most of the households actually use this BLT program to more savings or more investment other than the consumption of cigarettes. Because other unobserved factor is that actually the recipients of the BLT program is the housewives or the wives of the household, and not the dad or the father, because we can assume that if the father is holding more cash, the allocation of the expenditures can somewhat be different to the allocation of housewives, and the housewives can allocate better the money of the household for educational attainment of the children, medication, food consumption, etc., compared to the higher cigarette consumption. That the results of the model also found that the males are more associated with higher consumption of cigarettes than the female. So yeah, I guess it's not significant, it's not a big amount of money, but then when the BLT transfer of 300,000 rupiah is used well for a productive asset or productive investment, I think in the long run, it will beneficially pay off for their household.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for all of the question. Anybody else still have question? If not, I will give Zaki and Stefan my feedback. It's interesting, yeah, and I think you explain your project well. But my feedback is, if you want, you can actually kind of what is it called? You follow the paper that you just presented, and you can update the data. You can redo the analysis by comparing data from IFLS 4 to IFLS 5, because now we already have IFLS 5. So if you want to do that, I think it will add a lot of point to your project, because that way you can evaluate how the treatment that you mentioned in your presentation is going to affect the current data of cigarette consumption. Yes, Zaki, you have your hand raised.
I don't know. I just want to cross-check with you, Miss, because previously I just, on Pak Gumilang's class, I just also consulted with the same title. Okay. And he said that there is a shift in the IFLS 4 sample with the IFLS 5. So there's a different household. So I think, I don't know if it's, we can actually update, but there is a different, so we cannot make a panel between the IFLS 4 and the IFLS 5, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Zaki. Honestly, I haven't checked about that, so I did not know that the sample is changing. So there is probably high attrition, yeah. But maybe you can check that. If the attrition is not too high, maybe it's possible. If it's too high, then it's okay. You can use the approach that you use currently in your project. I think it's sufficient also.
Okay, thank you, Miss.
Okay, thank you. Well, that's it, yeah. Everyone has presented. Thank you very much. I appreciate all of your project. I think everyone is doing great. And this is the end of half of the semester, yeah. I will give you written feedback around next week, maybe during the UTS. And you can use the feedback to improve on your project. Then again, this is the end of the session. Thank you and have a great day, everyone. Goodbye.
Miss,
oh yeah,
I actually want to ask. I think I forgot. Do we have an exam for the midterm?
Oh, you don't. You don't have exam for midterm and then for final.
We don't have exam for both of it, so we just have to submit our assessment, our project.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you, Miss.
Yeah. Any more question? No? Okay. Then goodbye. See you next time.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, Miss.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Miss. Have a great day.